Part 1.
You will hear a conversation between a client and a flight centre agent about making changes to an airline booking. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5. Good morning, Mrs. Gray. This is Bert Stock speaking from Finnegan's Flight Centre. I can now confirm your flight to Singapore.
Oh, good. No problems, I hope.
No, everything is in order.
So we got the dates we wanted?
Yes, leaving from Hong Kong on the 25th of July and arriving in Singapore later the same day.
How long does the flight last?
Oh, about 3 hours 40 minutes.
So we'd get there at...
9:45.
In the evening?
No, 9:45 a.m.
But that means we'd be leaving at...
Your flight leaves Hong Kong at 6:05 a.m.
So we'd have to check in an hour before that?
Mrs. Gray, check-in closes 60 minutes before your scheduled departure. If you arrive after check-in has closed, you will not be able to board the flight, and you may forfeit your entire fare. I would strongly recommend that you arrive at the check-in counter at least 120 minutes before your departure time.
So you're saying we should be at the airport no later than 4:05 a.m?
That's correct.
But we'd have to get up in the middle of the night to arrive by that time. Can't we get a later flight?
Not on July 25th. Now, there is a later flight on certain weekdays, but not at the weekend.
Well, we must go with what we've got then, because we're not at all flexible on the dates because of work commitments.
Can I confirm that you want to return on August 7th?
Yes, that's the idea.
Flight VQ239 will depart from Singapore at 9:20 a.m. on August 7th.
Oh, that's a much more civilized time. Tell me, the time zone is the same, isn't it? We don't gain or lose an hour along the way.
There's no change in the time zone, so you can expect to be back at around 1 p.m. Does that suit you?
Oh, absolutely. I'll have time to unpack before dinner. We're expecting to meet friends at the new seafood restaurant at 8 o'clock.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Mrs. Gray, I'll send you all these details by an email or letter of confirmation. Which do you prefer?
Well, email is faster, but we've been having difficulties with our internet connection. So, if you could post it out, I'd appreciate that.
Now, just 1 or 2 other things to check before final confirmation. You're booked on a life-flight ticket.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, you'll only have carry-on baggage. Is that right?
Oh yes, that was the original idea. It's so much quicker not having to wait around at the luggage carousel, but...
Yes?
Can you remind me of the allowance again?
With a life-flight ticket, you're allowed 10 kilos of hand baggage.
I'm not sure that's such a good idea now.
Oh?
Well, apparently we're going to have to attend quite a few formal functions while we're away, so I think I'm going to need a real suitcase to fit the extra clothes and shoes in.
Well, that's not a problem. I can upgrade you to the next level and change your ticket to Easy Flight. There will be an extra charge, of course.
How much?
$30 per checked-in item of luggage, weighing no more than 22 kilos per item.
Well, we'll probably manage with just a single suitcase between the two of us. Is it possible to do it like that?
Yes, of course. You can take the Easy Flight option, and your husband can stay with the Light Flight ticket.
Great.
I'll give you your reservation number now, So if you need to make any further changes or inquiries, you can just quote this reference, okay?
Yes, I have a pen and paper. What is it?
L4G BWF.
L4G BUF?
WF.
Thanks, I've got it now.
At this point, I can actually book your seat numbers. Do you have any preference? Window or aisle?
Oh, not by the window, Bert. You see, I'm quite a nervous flyer, and I don't like looking out. What's more, my husband likes a bit of room to stretch his legs. Aisle would be good.
Great. That's sorted then. As I said, I'll send you the details, and if you need to talk to the agency again, just quote that reference number I gave you.
Thanks so much. Bye.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2.
You will hear an introduction to a cycling holiday that the leader of a college campaign club is delivering to its members. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 16.
Right. Now, let me bring you up to date with arrangements for our cycling tour next month. First of all, about the tents. You know at the beginning, the idea was that I arranged to borrow some tents from the college, but it turns out they will be used by the hiking club at the same time, so I'm afraid you will have to bring your own. So, do remember to tell me whether you prefer to use a single tent or share with others. In this case, I'll know how many tents there'll be when I make the reservation at the various campsites. Last time, some of you said you would like to hire bikes and pick them up when you arrive, instead of taking your own. Well, I've asked lots of shops or agencies about bike hiring in St Andrews, the town where we'll be arriving, and unfortunately there aren't any shops that offer this service, so which, I'm afraid, means taking your own. I'll book them on the train when I book the train tickets, which reminds me, I'll need to know the exact number of people going too, so that I can get a group discount on the train fare. Another one that'll need to be booked is tickets for the football match we discussed last time. I've inquired about availability, and there are only a few seats left, so anyone who wants to go will need to get tickets very soon, ideally today or tomorrow. At our next meeting, I'll be able to give you all individual packs with the final programme and something about the area we'll be cycling through and places we'll be visiting. I'm afraid I haven't had the time to do that yet.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 17 to 20.
Now, I'll tell you briefly about some of the attractions in the places we'll be staying. As I said, we'll be taking the train to St Andrews, where there are 1 or 2 very good restaurants. One thing that's definitely worth visiting there is the sites where the original town was constructed nearly 1,000 years ago. There's not much of the original buildings left, but there's still plenty to see. The site is being excavated, and you'll be able to help out if you want to. Our next overnight stop will be in the village of Cluny. There are a number of ancient barns here that have been modernised into a museum, indicating the significance of sheep in the area over the centuries. The wool used to be sold for cloth, and it brought riches to the district. There are also several photos describing how agricultural workers lived. From there, we'll leave for Penally. Penally is well known for its museum of village life, but that's being refurbished at the moment and isn't likely to reopen by the time we go there. But there is an open-air farmers' market every day, selling fruits, vegetables, cheese and meat, all grown or processed within a few miles of the town and sold by the farmers themselves. It's definitely worth a visit. In Varlo, which is one of the oldest towns in the region, there's a museum that shows how horses used to be the most universal way of travelling around, and how they were gradually substituted by steam, and later, of course, electric trains, buses, cars and bicycles. Right, now I'll pass around this sheet of paper.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3.
You will hear Tom and Annie, two students, talking with their professor about the assignment. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26.
Professor Tomlinson, may Annie and I please quickly ask you a few questions about the reflective journal assignment? It's just that we're a bit confused as to what you want us to include and discuss.
Yes, of course. What are you having trouble with?
Well, everything really. To start with, what should be included first in the reflective journal? Perhaps suggestions from others?
No. Firstly, you should include the study goals you set yourself at the beginning of the module. This section should have been discussed in some detail towards the beginning of the course by Professor May. You should be able to find her suggestions on the slides she has provided the class online.
OK, thank you, Professor. Could I also trouble you to take a brief look at my bibliography and footnotes? I feel like they're missing something. Most of our friends' bibliographies are longer.
Well, looking at this, Annie, I can see that you have used a wide range of resources, which shows that you have made effective use of communication technology. As far as I can tell, you need not make any changes to this, although you might want to double-check that your referencing complies with the Harvard referencing style regulations.
Oh, I'm very surprised you've said that. Thank you. Now I can set my mind at ease. Tom, you said you wanted to ask the professor about the achievements section.
Ah, yes, Professor. In the assignment guidelines, we're asked to introduce and elaborate on our biggest achievement in the past, saying which skills we learned in the process and how these skills can be transferred to various different future careers. The only problem is that I don't know what my greatest achievement actually is. I've only ever worked as a waiter in a hotel restaurant during the summer holidays from university.
If you worked as a waiter in a hotel restaurant, you're bound to have worked with other waiters as part of a team. Would you say that during your time as a waiter, you developed any leadership skills?
Yes, well, I suppose I was asked to become the team leader of the food and beverage department, but that's hardly an achievement.
You might not think so, but if you write that you were offered the position of the team leader, it shows a lot more about your character. For example, that you're charismatic and work well in a high-pressure situation.
I never would have thought to write that down. Thank you. I guess I should start listening to others more often. Annie, do you have any more questions, or are you ready to go back to the library?
Yeah, I think I've got everything I need. Thank you very much, Professor Tomlinson.
That was really helpful. I'm actually starting to look forward to writing this now, and it should be a really useful exercise to prepare us for writing CVs and applying for jobs. It's shocking how bad I am at identifying my strengths and weaknesses. Professor Tomlinson has shown me that I definitely need to start displaying some self-awareness.
Yeah, Tom, you really do. You're always so modest. Modesty is great until it comes to applying for jobs.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 27 to 30.
Oh no! I forgot to ask the professor about the section on identifying the skills gained through different activities. Do you remember? When it asks you, for example, whether writing an essay develops your study skills or your independent learning and so on.
Oh goodness, we really should have asked him that. I've been having trouble with it too. It just seems like such a pointless task. What do you reckon the answers are?
I think writing an essay might be a way of identifying and resolving a problem, because you have to state the problem in the introduction and then solve it. I'm not so sure about taking exams. I thought they were supposed to develop lots of different skill sets. If I really had to choose, I'd say that taking exams enables you to become more confident in yourself. Do you agree?
Maybe. I really don't know either. What do you think about the last two? Making class notes and presentation notes?
Oh, it's so difficult. I think making class notes has to be a way of becoming a more independent learner, because you yourself decide what the important information is and learn it. That reminds me, I find taking presentation notes is a disaster. The professors speak much too quickly, and I write much too slowly.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4. You'll hear an introduction on cheese making.
First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Cheese is one of those foods that we tend to take for granted as always having been with us. And it's odd to think that someone somewhere must have discovered the process to make cheeses. That takes place today. In the studio to tell us all about it is Monica Maxwell.
Today, we all know that the process of making cheeses takes place when microorganisms get into milk and bring about changes in its physical and biochemical structure. Well, obviously, we don't know who discovered the process, but it's thought that it came from Southwest Asia, about 8,000 years ago. In the early time, there were mainly two types of cheeses. One of them was rather tasteless and bland, in the case of the so-called fresh cheeses, which are eaten immediately after the milk has coagulated. And another one was rough-tasting and salty, in the case of the ripened cheeses, which are made by adding salt to the soft fresh cheese and allowing other biochemical processes to continue so that a stronger taste and a more solid texture resulted. The ancient Romans changed all that. They were great pioneers in the art of cheese-making, and the different varieties of cheese they invented and the techniques for producing them spread with them to the countries they invaded. This spread of new techniques took place between about 60 BC and 300 AD. You can still trace their influence in the English word cheese, which comes ultimately from the Latin word Caseus, that's C-A-S-E-U-S. At this stage in history, people weren't aware in a scientific way of the role of different microorganisms and enzymes in producing different types of cheese, but they knew from experience that cheese's tastes were relevant to something. If you kept your milk or your pre-cheese mixture at a certain temperature or in a certain environment, things would turn out in a certain way. In the 19th century, with the increasing knowledge about microorganism, there came the next great step forward in cheese making. Once it was known exactly which microorganism was involved in the different stages of producing a cheese, and how the presence of different microorganisms affected the taste, it was possible to introduce them deliberately and to industrialize the process. Nowadays, cheese is made on a large scale in factories, although the small producer working from his dairy farm continued to exist and still exists today. Cheesemaking moved very much into the world of technology and industrial processes, although because the aim is still to produce something that people like to eat, there's still an important role for human judgment. People still go round tasting the young cheese at different stages to see how it's getting on, and may add a bit of this or that to improve the final taste. Whatever the scale of production, there is still room for the development of art alongside the technology.
That is the end of part 4.